But let's talk about the tribalism you wrote about at the weekend.
Yes.
Because two big by-elections, neither of which really resulted in anything other than what you thought would happen.
Well, I used to spend a large part of my life reporting on by-elections, from Bermondsey to Darlington to Chesterfield, when they were thought to be big news. This is when the party system seemed to be about to shift, when the Social Democrats, you remember David Owen, Shirley
Yes,
Williams,
the Gang of Four.
And Bill Rogers all got together. There really did seem to be a genuine move away from Labour.
Yeah.
And it was therefore quite exciting in its way. But the funny thing was how the political party system got together and squeezed it out.
Yeah.
And Margaret Thatcher saved the Labour Party, something that is still not widely enough known.
Right.
She, in the Tory manifesto of, I think, 87, there was a proposal which would have deprived the Labour Party of trade union funds. It would have forced the unions to require people to opt in to giving to the Labour Party. And the Labour Party General Secretary at the time went to her and said, if you do this, then what you will do is you will almost certainly destroy the Labour Party, and what will happen is then you will be thrown out of office by the Social Democrats.
Yeah.
But if by any chance it doesn't work out like that and we ever get into power again, we will do the same to you. We will make it impossible for you ever to raise funds from business again.
Right.
So she gave up.
Right.
And that was the moment at which the Labour Party was saved, and Blairism became a possibility. If she hadn't done that, we could have genuinely had a revolution in British politics in the 80s and 90s, which might have changed things very substantially.
It might well have done, because of course, ironically, when Blair became the leader of the Labour Party, that was the beginning of the end of the trade unions having as much influence as they used to have.
But part of the reason they lost influence was because they were so much smaller, and they were so much smaller because the industries in which they existed had by and large disappeared. And then obviously there was the long period of Lord Levy, Lord Cashpoint, as he's known, raising non-trade union money for Labour, and I noted the other day that he was back in business.
Well, do you know, funnily enough, by complete coincidence, I saw him last week because I was in the House of Lords having lunch with Claire Fox, and as we were finding our way out through some internecine way, that was the only way she knew how to
It's a building site now, isn't it?
Well, yeah, there was a load of people sort of being led in to be shown around, and he had about 5 or 6 people with him, and I suddenly thought, I hadn't seen him for a while.
He's back. He's definitely, which is interesting.
Yeah.
It's a sign that the Blairites have decided to put all their muscle behind Keir Starmer, which could make a difference.
Well, it could, but except Keir Starmer seems to be sort of slightly losing his authority, doesn't
you
he?
can put all your muscle behind a good candidate, and you can put all your muscle behind an indifferent candidate, and of course, if it's a good candidate, it'll work.
Because it still seems very confused in the Labour Party. We saw Diane Abbott at the weekend shouting from the rooftops about the strike and why she was in support of it, and then we saw David Lammy yesterday saying that it was wrong to strike, and you're kind of going, well, where are you exactly?
Well, they're nowhere, and this is the whole problem with them. It has been so for a long time. I mean, Labour is in a very, very serious case, and Labour was probably more badly damaged than anybody else by the referendum. Because what happened at the referendum, we've talked about Gillian Duffy, the woman Gordon Brown called the bigot.
Yes.
She symbolised a type of Labour voter, very much, pro-trade union, pro-welfare state, very, very much old-fashioned 1945 Labour people, but not really all that keen on mass immigration.
No.
And they voted Labour loyally.
And many working-class people feel that way.
Exactly. They voted Labour loyally for decades.
Yeah.
And the fascinating thing about the Leave campaign, it was those voters who actually delivered the Leave majority. It was I realised what was going to happen quite about halfway through the referendum campaign when a bus driver said to me, "Everybody at my bus depot is going to vote to Leave." And I thought, this happened.
Yeah.
And from then on, I was certain that Leave would win. It was a huge internal Labour Party revolt, and a lot of those people have never quite decided to go back.
No.
But they'd be much keener on trade unions, for instance, than what
they would, which is why
the Islington intellectual.
Yes, and that's why they've got it so wrong. It seems to me that the Labour Party have lost their way because they don't any longer have a core sort of support, because the people who actually believe the things that they hate were their core support, but aren't anymore.
Well, to a great extent, I don't think the Labour Party could get a national majority again. Of course, the other thing is they've been massacred in Scotland, as have the Tories, and that's made a huge difference. But the Tories have a similar problem. For many, many years, their local associations have been dying out. They have real problems in by-elections getting anybody to do all the leafleting and knocking on doors that's necessary, because there's nobody there anymore, and the party is empty, and it's perfectly obvious to anybody who looks at it that it's not a remotely conservative party. So, and yet they still vote for it. And people say to me, "Oh, well, why don't you stand for Parliament?" So, because you wouldn't vote for me.
Right.
There is no instance of a genuinely independent candidate winning a seat at a general election. And people say, well, what about Martin Bell? I said, Martin Bell won in that. You remember that?
He was the anti-sleaze candidate.
Well, yes,
he?
but he also, the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats withdrew on his behalf. I promise you, and I'm absolutely, totally confident of this, if I stood for Parliament, the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats would not withdraw to make way for me. It's just not going to happen. So, and people would then, general election time comes, at by-elections they have a sort of holiday, but general election time comes, they go back into tribal.
And I mean, you know, and also if you did win and you were the sole independent in the Parliament, you would have literally no power. There's nothing you can do. I interviewed Bernie Sanders years ago when I worked in America, when he was running to be the first independent senator for Vermont, and he won, and he got into the Senate in Washington DC, and he managed to do absolutely nothing in the years that he worked there. And you know, he ran for president and all of that, but as an independent with some rather unusual views, he couldn't get anything done.
No, all parliaments and senates are all about making deals with the others, and that's why political parties exist and always will exist. The problem with this country is it has two dead political parties, Labour and the Tories, which are kept alive by state funding. There's a lot more state funding of parties in opposition than people realise, and by dodgy billionaires. And if either of them were forced to rely on going out in the streets and rattling tins, nobody would give them anything. But because of these, and also because of the broadcasting rules, which oblige the BBC to give huge coverage to existing parties and don't give them any real incentive to give new up-and-coming parties a fair crack, the system is frozen, and it's very hard to shift it. But if we could have two parties, I've said always basically a Daily Mail party and a Guardian party, in which all the real issues which divide people came up, I think it would transform our politics.
Well, there's certainly no doubt the Tory party, as it is now run by Boris Johnson, is not at all conservative, and many people now tell me that they're never going to vote Conservative again on the basis of that.
They say that now. But you see, when it comes to it, are they going to vote for a Keir Starmer party or let a Keir Starmer party?
Will they vote Lib Dem, though?
Well, possibly, but then again, it's the Lib Dems are pretty plainly operating in an unstated alliance. I mean, look, if look at the Labour vote in the Tiverton-Honiton by-election, it collapsed almost to nothing. Now,
they lost their deposit.
Why was that?
Well, we're told it was tactical voting.
Well, yes, but no one's ever going to admit to it, are they? Because it's dangerous to admit to it. But people are going to spot that the Lib Dems are pretty much holding hands with Keir Starmer. And the other thing that Keir Starmer's never really been questioned about is what is his attitude towards the Scottish nationalists. If he gets enough seats in England to form an alliance with the Scottish nationalists,
would he do it?
Westminster majority. Well, he doesn't need to do anything formal, but would he work with them? And how much is he prepared to give them to get it?
Well, quite.
But if he won't say this, I bet he doesn't say this before the election, but people will suspect, won't they, that a Labour victory, whatever form it takes, will mean the breakup of the Union.
Yes, and if they are, as we believe, determined to get the Tories out, if that's the only way they can do it, then surely that's what they will do.
Well, then what would be the point of getting the Tories out if by doing so you actually give the left many of the things it's always wanted?
Yes, no, I agree.
It doesn't make sense, and it's the great pity is that we didn't sort this out back in a dozen years ago. When the Tory party could easily have been chucked in the bin and carted away to landfill, and replaced with something better.
For crimes against conservatism.
Much harder now.
Exactly right. Peter Hitchens is here. We're talking about a great many things. We'll be doing more. We'll take more of your calls as well, coming up shortly after this on talkTV. Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham, right here on talkTV. Peter Hitchens is here with me. You were writing about this tribalism at the weekend, but you mentioned this amazing sort of plot, which I suppose, for those of us who are interested in politics, you think is going on all the time, because I won't say who I get them from, but I get a lot of messages from Tory MPs who are attempting to either, one, influence me, or two, tell me things that are going on behind the scenes in the Tory party in Westminster. And how unpopular Boris Johnson is, and how, you know, it's only a matter of time. And this sort of relentless plotting goes on, doesn't it?
What else have they got to do? The things? I mean, they're under-occupied people, I think.
Yes, I think so.
And there are a lot of stuff just sitting on committees, voting the way the whips tell them to do half the time, or answering letters about people.
But there must be like more failed plots in politics than any other line of work.
This one was a very narrow thing. It was a by-election in Darlington where the Labour candidate was expected to lose, and I use expected probably in both senses of the word. I don't think he knew he was expected to lose, but everybody else did.
Yeah.
And then he won.
Right.
And if he'd lost, then there would have been this great putsch against poor dear old Michael Foot, who was then the Labour leader. He would have been heaved out by the brutal figure of Dennis Healey.
Yes.
And imagine an election
Healey
campaign.
would have been good, wouldn't he?
Imagine an election campaign with Margaret Thatcher on one side and Dennis Healey on the other. It would certainly have been fun.
Yeah.
And it would have been a lot closer than that 1980.
Yeah, Foot was a sort of pathetic character in the end. I mean, he wasn't a bad guy, but he
wasn't a bad guy. And but by then he was, you know, all that doddering and was the result of a very bad car crash.
Yes. I used to see him on Hampstead Heath regularly because I used to live up there, and you know he genuinely couldn't walk very well.
No, he was a personally kind and intelligent person, but he could never really. It was an act of extraordinary folly to imagine they could ever have won an election with him as leader. But that was the last chance.
But I suppose
if that by-election had gone the other way, then we would have seen a wholly different political scene in this country.
But then, because had that happened, perhaps you'd never have seen the rise of Kinnock and Blair and all that crap.
A lot of things would not have happened. But here's the thing: that's an unusually important result of a by-election.
Yes,
which in fact didn't happen. Most by-elections tell you almost nothing about what will happen at the next general election.
Well, I don't think you can draw any conclusions from either of those results, really. I mean, it means absolutely nothing.
No, and of course everybody now is saying, well, Johnson must go, Johnson must go. Well, okay, but the question which then comes back to all of the Tories who say Johnson must go is, all right, who have you got?
No, they haven't got anyone.
What have they got?
But that's the thing. But also, after a while, you keep saying the same thing over and over again with the same result, i.e. he doesn't go, then he's never going, is he? I mean...
Well, I mean, there is always the possibility that he loses general elections and goes then. But will he or won't he? Everybody thought John Major would lose the 1992
I remember,
election.
including John Major.
Yeah, and with reason.
Yes.
But I know it didn't happen. No. So who knows? I don't know. It's not my business. It's an intrusion into private grief for me.
But we now find ourselves in the midst of. I mean, more and more whenever you come in here, it's more ridiculous. It seems to me the G7 summit looks like just some kind of overprivileged boys' club where they just stand around trying to look good in pictures and basically say nothing of any merit at all.
The word is boondoggle.
Yes,
it's just an occasion where they will browse and sleuth together at our expense, and I suppose there may be some advantage in them having met each other personally. But that's about it. But it gives the people who report on that kind of thing something to do, doesn't it? And
I heard Ursula von der Leyen last night on some radio station I was listening to talking about how they're going to give a load of money now to developing countries in order to stop the influence of China. And you go, well, one, you haven't got any money, and two, exactly how are you going to make that happen?
Yes, it is interesting, isn't it? Especially given the Chinese are much better at doling out money than we are.
Well, what they do is they build infrastructure with their money.
But no, they aren't particularly fussy about it. They don't demand commitments to democracy and justice and freedom or anything like that.
They just give them a load of money.
Find the kind of people who are going to take money from them and give it to them. And then, a few years later, they discover what the conditions are, and they find out that China is permanently squatting on their society. I went to Africa and went round a bit of this. It's astonishingly clever the way they do it, and people don't realise just how much their countries are being bought.
Yes. I'm told there's a Pacific island, and I can't tell you the name because I don't remember it, but somewhere sort of in the South Pacific where they went to suggest that they could help with tourism for that island, and they've now ended up basically building a military base where a lot of their ships go. So it was meant to be for cruise ships, but in the end that didn't work out terribly well. But they built this whole sort of docking area, which is now a stopping off point for the Chinese Navy.
They're quite good at building almost entirely new islands in that part of the world.
Yeah.
It'll be very handy when their huge, great aircraft carriers, which they're now building, get going. But they're very determined. If anybody else was doing it, it would be called imperialism.
Yes. But it's not.
Chinese
I know.
Do it,
it's
they
extraordinary.
Get away with it.
Now, I said at the beginning of this show that I wasn't going to do the abortion debate because I don't know that I want to. But you want to have something to say about it?
Well, yes, I had a certain amount of how shall I put it?
Vitriol?
No, back and forth this weekend because I decided that I often get people on Twitter saying their basic line of attack when I say anything I don't like is, "Oh, why did the wrong brother die?" about my late brother Christopher.
Which is particularly unpleasant, isn't it?
They say it all the time. I mean, it's an illustration how feeble their arguments are. And it was partly in the back of my mind when the abortion thing came out. Well, I will get out an article. It's actually an interview that my brother gave I must be more than a dozen years ago now, obviously, about abortion, in which he said, "I'm against it." And gives perfectly good left-wing reasons for being against abortion. Now, you don't hear this very often. There was a very, very articulate American libertarian leftist called Nat Hentoff, who ran a blog called Sweet Land of Liberty, in which he also made the left-wing case against abortion. Right. But it was rare. But it surprised quite a lot of people to understand that it's a more nuanced subject than they think.
Of course it is.
It's always puzzled me that it's such a big feminist thing. Because certainly my memory in the 1960s, when the abortion laws in this country were being liberalised, abortion was not made legal in this country in 1967, it was already legal. Yeah. It was made more legal. But I seem to remember the people who were most relieved when that went through were irresponsible men. Yes. Who always seem to me to be the biggest beneficiaries for me.
Well, like all things, it's become an hysterical argument now, hasn't it? And you cannot have a sort of reasoned argument with almost anybody about it. You know, the mantra that America has banned abortion is not true.
Oh, that isn't true.
The mantra that, certain states have banned abortion is also not true. And in fact, many of the states will have abortion laws like most of Europe, aside from Britain and the Netherlands, which have got particularly liberal.
I think some of them will make it pretty much impossible. But here's the point. I mean, what do you?
They'll make some kinds of abortion impossible. They won't make all abortion impossible.
But the thing is isn't it something which really ought to be discussed rationally rather than emotionally? If we want to have the
well, can anything be discussed rationally anymore?
It can be.
Can it?
Well, that was the point of.
But what was the last rational?
The other point of my putting this stuff out. Okay, all you people who say that I'm a hateful reactionary
devil incarnate
who wants to trample on the rights of women. Here they are confronted with somebody who's the opposite of what they think I am, saying pretty much the same as I do, that there's something seriously worrying about taking the life of an unborn baby. Yes. And that there ought to be something seriously worrying about it, and you don't have to be a reactionary monster to believe this. Yes. I think that might be the start of reasoned argument once people realise that.
Yes, but I suspect it would be up against such a wall of fug, for want of a better word. I mean, I was rather amused by Piers Morgan's observation at the weekend where he said, isn't it funny how everybody seems to have rediscovered the word woman?
Yeah.
Because,
I know where we're going.
Yeah, because the left...
Starmerland here.
Well, Starmerland, who is, and many of the people who are championing, whatever the opposite is to what happened at the Supreme Court, last week couldn't tell you what a woman was.
You're demanding consistency.
Yes, I know.
In your opponents.
I shouldn't.
Which
it's shocking.
Will only get you into the most terrible trouble.
As ever, Peter, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Hitchens, every Sunday in the Mail on Sunday, although now and occasionally during the week as well. In fact, we didn't get to that great piece you wrote. We'll do that perhaps next time. We'll take some calls. This is talkTV.